Here comes the extortion again. On Tuesday of this week, the CEO of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York called the heads of New York's largest banks into his offices in Lower Manhattan. We don't know exactly what was said, but we do know that he told the assembled bankers that they must start cutting executive compensation or the government will do it for them. The government admits it has no lawful authority to regulate compensation at banks that never received TARP funds or received them but paid them back already. So was this extortion? Undoubtedly, it was the threat to have the FDIC audit the banks if they failed to toe the pay czar's line. Haven't we been here before? Didn't the Fed and the Treasury and the FDIC threaten banks in the past to sacrifice their sound business judgment to the wishes of politicians or the commands of the regulators? Isn't it the regulators who have brought us the recession in the first place? Joining me now to discuss all this is Connecticut Senate candidate Peter Schiff. He is also the president of Euro-Pacific Capital. Peter, welcome back to Freedom Watch.
Thanks for having me.
Were you surprised that the head of the New York Federal Reserve called bank CEOs into his office, over which he has regulatory authority, but not over which he has control of compensation, and said, you guys are paying yourselves too much. Start paying less?
Well, I'm not surprised that they would do something like that. You know, this is all part of this camel's nose under the tent. Once we let them in there, you know, they start bailing everybody out and propping the companies up. You know, not only are people making too much money, but they're worried about the PR. So now they have to go in and try to regulate everybody's salaries so they don't look bad.
All right, what will happen to the banks who will say to him, go take a hike? We either paid back all the stock you bought in us, we bought it back, or we never succumbed to TARP in the first place.
I don't know what's going to happen to them, but the problem is, you know, you do have the FDIC in there. You do have regulation of these banks, and maybe they can apply pressure through the regulatory agencies on the banks that aren't towing the line. And that's a real threat. And I'm sure that the bankers are, you know, feel the weight of that threat.
So, in other words, the FDIC would threaten to audit these banks, which could cost a fortune in employee time to comply with the audit and even loss of shareholder value as the reputation of the bank recedes.
Sure, and I'm sure a lot of the regulations are enforced subjectively, and you know there's a lot of gray areas in there, and they could either be lenient or be strict based on what's going on. You know, and unfortunately, we have to allow these decisions to be made by the market. We can't allow them to be politicized. You just mentioned it was political pressure to make home loans that banks wouldn't normally make. Banks are trying to make a profit. If they're not making a loan, it's because they're fearful of a loss. We don't want governments coming in and interfering with what the market is accomplishing.
Isn't this the definition of fascism, private ownership but government control? I mean, to me, this sounds like Mussolini in the 30s. Okay, you own this bank. We don't like what you're doing with your money. Do it our way or we'll come in and take over.
Well, look, that's what our entire country has become. I mean, we've become a socialist economy. Fascism is a form of socialism, just like communism is a form of socialism. But generally under fascism, the politicians are smart enough not to nationalize the businesses outright. They allow private ownership, but then they control the businesses through taxes and regulation.
All right, switching gears a little bit. What is the status of gold today? Where do you see it going? Is it a sound investment?
Well, gold's on a new high as we speak. Gold is now closing in on $1,100 an ounce.
Surprised?
No. I mean, I own gold. I'm buying it for my clients. I think it's going a lot higher. In fact, the Reserve Bank of India just yesterday bought 200 metric tons of gold from the IMF. That was half the gold they had for sale. Do you think the Central Bank of India just paid top dollar for gold because they think this is the end of the run? It's going a lot higher. Other central banks have to buy more gold, particularly these BRIC countries like China and like Brazil. They need more gold. Their reserves are loaded up with dollars. Gold's going a lot higher, specifically because of the monetary and fiscal policies of the current administration.
Just to educate me for a minute, if the Central Bank of India buys 200 metric tons of gold, do they take physical custody of that much gold? Does somebody put that much gold on a boat and ship it to India?
Well, it depends. I'm not sure where the IMF's gold is stored, but it's basically all they have to do is change the ownership. The gold might not actually have to be shipped. It might be held in the same central bank facility. It's just they're going to take the name, you know, India. I mean, they're going to take IMF's name off it, and they're going to stick India's name on there.
Central Bank of India.
But more central banks are going to want to do this because a lot of these central banks, India now, with this purchase, they only have about 7% of their reserves in gold. China only has 1%, 1.5% of its reserves in gold. Compared to the major G7 nations have more like 30%, 35% in gold. So these emerging markets have been
real gold that they own, or in certificates that somebody else owns?
No, actual gold.
All right.
But you need to have money behind the monetary system. You have to have something tangible backing all your paper, and that's gold.
Ben Bernanke doesn't believe that, does he?
Well, that's the problem. If we believe that, we wouldn't necessarily be in all this trouble. Politicians don't like gold because gold puts a discipline on politicians.
Limits
they don't
on
want
what
that.
They can do with the paper.
Well, because they can only spend if they have gold. They just can't keep printing money. But what's going to happen is because of all this money we're printing to artificially stimulate the economy. And remember, the stimulus is just making our problems worse. We're not going to have a recovery until consumers stop spending. We're going to have a recovery that's going to be built on savings, investment, and production. But as long as we keep trying to stimulate more consumption, we're going to keep debasing our money, and the price of gold is going to keep going up.
How I wish the President and his people and Secretary Geithner agreed with you and understood basic economics 101, but they apparently don't. Switching gears again. You're running for the Republican nomination for the Senate in Connecticut. Yesterday, the most democratic of democratic states in the Union, my home state of New Jersey, elected a Republican as governor, ousted an incumbent sitting Democrat who spent $30 million of his own dollars. The President of the United States came to New Jersey 5 times, including as recently as Sunday, where he held enormous rallies, embracing John Corzine, calling him my partner. Are you heartened by the victory of Governor-elect Chris Christie in your neighboring state of New Jersey?
Well, I think it's a good sign that we got rid of an incumbent Democrat, but I would be more optimistic if we got a real conservative, libertarian, small government guy to replace him. I think it's a step in the right direction going to Christie. It remains to be seen, how committed he is to these type of principles. But hopefully this can follow through to my campaign in Connecticut in 2010, because hopefully if I beat the other Republicans,
right,
I can run against Chris Dodd.
Well, if you get that nomination and run against Chris Dodd, I think it would be the race to watch in the whole country, because you will force Chris Dodd to confront all these unpleasant truths, which are basically his personal corruption and utter ignorance of the way the economy works.
Well, absolutely. And I would give the residents of Connecticut, the voters of Connecticut, for the first time ever, the opportunity to vote for an actual Republican who is going to stick to Republican principles when he gets into office and not just sell out to get reelected, to actually shrink the size of government dramatically and restore sound money and try to bring freedom back to the country.
You are singing my tune, Peter, as well as those of us who are watching now. How can you sell that in a state like Connecticut, which, to me, is almost as bad as New Jersey?
Well, we're going to see. We're going to see if the Connecticut voters have the stomach for the truth. They're so used to lies. They might not even recognize the truth when they hear it. But look, these problems are getting worse. I think the backlash is coming from the fact that people can sense that we're still moving in the wrong direction.
Right.
For all the talk of change, we haven't changed anything. We've just compounded the size of the mistakes that we're making. And as more and more Americans lose their jobs and get frustrated with the rising cost of living and more of this, same old empty promises from mainstream politicians, maybe a guy like me who's got nothing to do with politics, who's a private citizen,
right,
but who has an understanding of these issues, who saw a lot of this stuff coming when other people didn't, who is committed and willing to, take time out of his career to try to go to Washington and undo the damage that the politicians have caused.
You and I are both friends of Ron Paul. Everybody watching us knows that he had that enormously successful fundraising bomb on November 5th, 2007. Do you have one of those bombs coming? How do they work?
I've raised more money. Last quarter, I raised over $1 million. I raised more money than any of the other Republican candidates in the race. In fact, I might have been one of the top money raisers in the country, and I hadn't even announced I was running yet. Now I'm running. There is a money bomb that somebody organized for tomorrow, for the 5th of November, at my website at schiffforsenate.com. We got a brand new website that we're launching today. So if you've been to the website before, it's brand new today. The only thing that's really missing is some of the issues. They'll be added in the next week or two. But it's a new site, a new look, and you can go online at schiffforsenate.com and donate to the money bomb starting midnight tonight and all day tomorrow. So it'd be great if we can raise a few $100,000 and show the world or the country that there is support for freedom and liberty in this country.
Peter Schiff, thanks for joining us on Freedom Watch.
Thanks.